Okay, hi everyone. My name is Paroma. I'm a peer advisor at the Career Center. Today, I'm going to be talking about cover letters, best practices, what exactly makes a cover letter, and then answering any questions that you guys might have. And thank you all so much for coming. I'm so excited to see a turnout. And I'm just going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to walk you through how it's going to be going. So if you have any questions come up, um, please hold it till the end just so we can do the general questions. Otherwise, you can just raise your hands and I'll call on you. Does that sound good? Okay. So welcome to Do the Right Thing, which I thought was a very funny pun. And this is sort of how it's going to go. I'm going to give a brief introduction to cover letters, go through an activity with you guys. We're going to look at some examples or some sample letters and talk about them, see what makes them good or less than ideal. And then we're going to go into questions, and then I'm going to talk about upcoming events. Okay, so what exactly is a cover letter? So in the simplest terms, it's a document highlighting relevant skills and experiences that show that you are the best candidate for the position, which sounds very similar to a resume in some ways, but the way that I look at it is that a resume is a mirror of what you are, but a cover letter is sort of where you can advocate for yourself. It's talking about specific positions, it's talking about specific skills related to that position. So unlike resumes, all cover letters are employer and position specific, which means that you can have a general template if you're applying for similar positions, whether that be within the similar industries or within similar companies, but they should always be customized. So there are some areas where there are specific places where you can customize them to an employer position, but then some places there's also ways in which you can make it your own, based on your preferences and what you believe to be relevant. It's also a good way to showcase your writing skills, because often companies may ask to have someone who is skilled at writing, but they may not ask for the submission of a specific writing sample. So it's always good to write a good cover letter that showcases not only your skills that are relevant to the position, but also your skills as a writer. So a traditional cover letter format, I'm going to talk about this for now, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about moving away from tradition towards the end. But traditional cover letter format follows the standard business letter format, which is you will have your contact information, the contact information of the employer or the company that you're applying to, and you will always maintain a very formal tone, as well as use salutations. And in this, we usually say use a simple font that's just easy to read, not only by a human, but also so that applicant tracking softwares that a lot of employers use can still pass the document that you've submitted. So typically those would be Times New Roman, Arial, Calibri, stuff like that. It doesn't have to be within those three, just anything that's easy and accessible to read. So the font I've used on this isn't any of those, but it's still easy to read. And it could pass through applicant tracking software as well. We usually say do a 12 font. This doesn't mean that every single cover letter you write has to be 12 font Times New Roman. It can be between 10 to 14, but staying within that range makes it normal to look at, which sounds a little strange, but it's not really in your face, but it's also not like you're squinting to read. Some people also say the ideal font to use the same one you've used in your resume, and there are limitations on that, which I'll talk about later, but this isn't a necessary thing to do. It does help to have a little bit of consistency across documents, but again, coming down to specific font choices and specific font size, it really is a personal choice. It's just remembering those specific details of like making sure it's accessible, making sure it's a decent size. All cover letters, typically for positions in North America, tend to be one page, just like resumes, and they can be anywhere from 3 to 5 paragraphs in total, which I'll break down in the next couple of slides. However, some positions might ask for longer than one page, in which case, obviously, that's relevant. That's completely okay. But I would say the template should stick to about one page, just so you can build on it as much as you want when you're specifying it to positions. So another big tip that we recommend is using the same language that employers do in their job descriptions. So like I previously mentioned, a lot of employers will put these materials through applicant tracking software. So it's always good to use those keywords that they do to sort of help make sure that your cover letter is standing out. This doesn't mean like copy paste what they're saying, but for example, if they're like, we're looking for someone who's motivated and diligent, using those words is always a good indication, not only that you've read the job description detailedly and look you're applying because you are what they need, but it's also just a good way to, like, a little trick to help with the application. Lastly, one of the biggest things that we always mention is salutations. Sometimes people will start cover letters with "to whomsoever it may concern," which is very impersonal. So I would always say go for, if you can, try to find the name of the person who is applying. A lot of that will be accessible on company websites or even on their LinkedIn. But if you can't find the name, at least using a title, if you could find that. So whether that be hiring manager, like I've mentioned here, or recruitment coordinator, it's always a good indication that you've gone and put in the effort to look into the company, look into what they're doing, and also that you are motivated and genuinely interested. So this is not a typical format that you use for cover letters, but this is how a typical cover letter would progress. So in the first bit, you will have your personal contact information. Something that I really recommend that has worked for me and it's made me look very consistent across my materials is using the same header that you use on your resume for your cover letter. So on your resume, up at the top, you have your name, your address, your phone number, your email address, and it's always like pretty succinctly formatted. It's always a good way to use it on your own cover letter. It ends up looking a little bit like a letterhead, and it just looks really put together. And again, when a reviewer is reviewing them, they can put them right next to each other and know that the materials are exactly yours. Once you're done with that, you'll sort of follow the traditional business or formal letter format. So you'll have the date, the contact information of the place you're applying to. Having a title or a subject line isn't really necessary anymore because of how a lot of companies do have you apply through portals or through email. But if you're applying physically, it's always a good way to have it in. Again, it's also an optional thing if you feel like it is necessary and you would like to have one, it's your choice to go for it. And then you'd have your salutation. Again, like I said, trying to keep it personal, trying to keep it like not as general as "to whomsoever it may concern," because it's just not very nice to receive a letter and you're like, oh, "to whomsoever it may concern." So putting in that little bit of extra work to try to find out who exactly will be reading it, or even guessing who might be reading it, is always a good front. And then you move into the paragraphs. Like I said, a typical cover letter is between 3 to 5 paragraphs. So I'm going to walk through what some of those paragraphs might be. So the first paragraph is usually why you're writing, how you're learning, and basic information about yourself. So this is the area where you typically be like, hi, so dear whomsoever, I'm a freshman at AU, and I'm applying for the position of environment and sustainability intern at your organization. And I learned of this position, or like as was listed on Handshake. And then if you know someone who's working at the company or you have a connection, it's always good to mention it just because it might be the one extra thing that sets you apart from another candidate is having that person who can advocate for you as well. So you could be like, I heard about this position from John Doe who works at your company, or John Doe who works as X, Y, and Z at your company. And it's always good to, mention if they recommend the job to you as well. Then your second paragraph would sort of be specific to yourself and the responsibilities and requirements they're looking for in a candidate. So for example, if that job listing is like, we're looking for someone who is very good at data collection and then data analysis, you talk about your skills in that, or you talk about other transferable skills. So for example, you can talk about, I've worked as an editor for my school journal, and I've worked on a lot of documents. I'm able to pass information really well, and I'm able to process at high speeds. Or again, if you're specifically like, oh, well, I've worked previously as an environment and sustainability intern, that's what you're applying for at a different company. And this is what I learned from there. And this is how it fits into what you guys are looking for. So this is sort of a way in which to take the experience that you talk about on your resume and make them a little bit more you, give them more human feel to them. And it's also a good way to sort of show why you're interested in a company and sort of how you working for them would be beneficial for them as well, because you are completely qualified. The third paragraph is sort of an optional area, and this is wherein you would pick about some other details on your resume that they might not have mentioned in the qualification section, but you feel like might be relevant. So for example, if you're applying for a position to work at the UN, it's a really broad example. If you're applying to work at the UN, and for example, when you a sophomore in college, you actually like spoke at the UN as a guest speaker. Very big general example, but this would be a good place to mention that, because it might not be something that necessarily shows those skills that they're looking for, but it is something that's impressive and relevant. And it's something that shows, again, that personal interest, that personal qualification. In paragraph 4, this is sort of what I see is when you're walking out the door, this is the last thing you would say, which is to talk about why this position is something that you want. Because I think a lot of times when people do cover letters, they sort of focus on, oh, well, I'm going to talk about why I would be a really good fit for this organization and why they should hire me ASAP, which is one route that people take. Another route that people take is like, hey, love your job, love your position, please, please, please hire me. And those things aren't necessarily bad, because that is what a cover letter is meant for, is to sort of tell them why you want a job and also why you're good for the job. But if you're doing one or the other, it doesn't really have that much meaning. So sort of combining both those together is always a good way. So throughout the cover letter, you're sort of talking about your skills, you're talking about why this organization is relevant to you, but this is also a place in which you could talk about why it would mean a lot to you or how it fits into your personal goals. So for example, if you're applying to be a policy research intern, and in the future you want to work in, on the hill, so sort of talking about, this fits into my future goals because of my interest and my passion in doing this as a career. Obviously, as a standalone, that sentence wouldn't mean much, but when you combine it with the skills that you have along with the interest that you have in the company, showing that they fit into a further plan you have for yourself, again, shows that you're genuinely interested, that you genuinely have this passion. And then you would also do sort of, again, a reiteration of your contact information. You will also, this is you typically you'd be like, oh, if you want to reach out to me for an interview, like I'd be happy to answer any questions. This is my contact info. And then thank you for your consideration. Again, I'm speaking very generally. This is not how you'd write a formal letter, but this is sort of stuff you'd talk about in it. And then you'd have your sign off, which would be your signature on a hard copy letter or your name if you're typing it. Again, you don't have to go specifically for sincerely, because I know that a lot of people don't really like using the word sincerely, but sort of in that general direction of keeping it formal, keeping it succinct, and sort of remembering to include your information on that is very important. So yeah, I think, like I said earlier, it's good to have like a template like this where you write out the general skills, especially if you know you're applying for a lot of positions that are the same. But every time you apply for a position, please, please, please make sure to check the cover letters, because I cannot emphasize how many times people will come up to us and be like, well, I applied for this job and I didn't get it, and I really don't get it. And I'll look at that cover letter and they've submitted to X, Y, and Z company with the name of QYJ company. And it's just like, well, you've got to show them that you care. You've got to put in that effort, and cover letters are a perfect way to do so, and demonstrating your interest, demonstrating the care and concern that you have for this position. And yeah, so this is a QR code that you can scan to access the cover letter templates that we have on the AU website. In addition to this, after this is all done, I'm going to take your emails down so that I can send you some follow-up materials, whether that be templates or guides, and also just so that you guys have our information if you ever have any questions. So feel free to scan it, and then we'll move on to the next section. But if anyone has any quick questions, feel free to ask now. Otherwise, we can also hold on till the end. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to a sort of activities. I love if you guys want to get involved. I'm going to be walking through some examples of cover letters, and I'd like for you guys to sort of tell me, you know, what's good about them, what's not so good about them, and then we'll talk about them as a group. These aren't taken from students, they're all samples, or they've all had their information taken out, so do not worry. We're not airing anyone's dirty laundry. Oh, that was really great, huh? Okay, so great. Okay, we'll come back to that one. So this is an example of a cover letter. Let me just pull it up here. So it reads, "To whom it may concern," and this has been submitted via email. So it's a direct email. It just says, "To whom it may concern," and then my name is Dash. I'm an interested applicant in the position currently available. My skills consist of being great in multitasking, great with computers, patient bilingualism, reliable, and having very flexible hours. I'm 24 years old, which is why I think this position is a great fit for me. I've attached my resume in the hopes of being considered for it. I'm available weekdays, weekends, and at any time nights. Thank you in advance for your time reading this email. Should you choose to move forward with my application, please do not hesitate to call me at Dash to schedule a more formal interview or contact me via email. Also, I'd be happy to provide you with additional information about my qualifications and references. Attentively, Dash. So feel free to just start speaking. You have a comment here. So if anyone wants to just talk about what's going on here, feel free. Yes, Jocelyn.
But to who it may concern, I feel like maybe something. And overall, the quote unquote letter itself is really short, and it doesn't really explain much of like what this person is really capable of, and explain like how their skills, or if they even have like experience behind these skills, I guess.
Very good point. So Morgan, thank you, Jocelyn. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It just seems a little disorganized. Like the person writing it jumps from idea to idea, and there's not exactly like a clear theme to each paragraph.
Very true. Those are both really good examples. And yeah, I completely agree. It starts off very impersonal. It really just throws a lot of things at you, and we're just expected to believe them. There's nothing to back up all the things they're saying. In addition to that, they don't really tell us. They don't specify what position. They don't specify anything else about themselves. The fact they say I'm 24 years old is why I think this position would be a great fit for me, which may be relevant, but we don't really know anything else about them. And they sort of expect the employer to just read the resume and then put the puzzle pieces together. In addition to that, they sort of say like, "Oh, please do not hesitate to contact me," and like talk to me, which is sort of well, it's not wrong. This is how you talk, but it's not very formal. So I think there are some good parts of this in which they talk about their skills, which based on imagination might be relevant to the position. They do talk about how they're available for interviews. They do talk about the availability. They do attach other materials. They do open up opportunities for further contact, and they do provide that contact information. So there are good elements, but I think that there is better writing to be done. And I think that could be benefited through a bit more organization, like you said, Morgan, or even a little bit more formality, like you said, Jocelyn. But I also think just a little bit more structure would have been a great example. Cool. Thank you so much, guys. So the next, that was really fun. So next up is this example. So this is submitted through LinkedIn. So the formatting is going to be a little bit different, but I think some of the key elements would still stay the same. So to whom it may concern, this letter is to introduce myself and to let you know of my interest in becoming a part of your company. The enclosed resume will furnish you with information concerning my overall employment background, training, education, and skills. My work abilities are backed up with experiences and knowledge. I assure you that I can successfully fulfill any obligations requiring of any responsibility upon your company. In each of my previous job experiences, I have performed my assignments with a high degree of skill and professionalism. My current objective is to obtain a position that will fully utilize my skills and offer an opportunity for continued professional growth. I believe in excellence and have always dedicated myself, my talents, and my creative abilities to assure the successful accomplishment of any company goals. My positive attitude and willingness to work diligently makes me a valuable asset to any organization that will employ me. I'm confident that my skills will be an asset and have a favorable impact in your organization. I look forward to hearing from you and hopefully schedule an interview in which I hope to learn more about your company. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, blank. Okay, so what do you guys think about this? Feel free to just start speaking. You don't have to raise your hands.
It's putting too much responsibility on the employer to look up what their skills and experience are, and like not making it as easy as possible for them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there are some very good sentences in here. There are some things that employers do look for, but there are so many empty blank spaces, right? There is, oh, I have these abilities that are really good. I have some really good training and skills. I'm very professional in my previous job experiences. I was really good at it. And it says a lot without really telling the employer anything. Like that could have been 7 people that submitted the same thing. And based on what you read about their experiences, you could, again, fill in the gaps for yourself. So I think this is an example of good writing, but a lack of substance. So what are ways in which you guys think this could have sort of been improved?
I guess I could go. I think like, this is Jocelyn again, but like explaining why they're so confident in their skills and what they're like, they explain like they have good skills, like more detail on the skills and like what they are, like the level of professionalism that they claim to have. And then more on them as a person, because this also is like very just bland. You don't even know, you don't learn anything about this person at all, except that they seem to have some skills and professionalism. So just putting anything like about themselves and like what they've experienced that explains like why they feel like they have such a high degree of skill and professionalism and like what their skills are.
Sure. I completely agree. I think this is an example of how I spoke earlier about there being 2 kinds of cover letters. This is one very good example of like, I have so many skills and you should hire me and I'd be so lucky if I work for you, which isn't a bad thing. That is what cover letters are for. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to, I guess the best way to say it is like trust in your source. You have great skills and it's important for you to be able to articulate those skills as well. And I think this is a good example of someone who's very good at articulating, but is sort of unable to tell us because they're like, oh, I've given you everything, you can figure it out yourself. And yeah, again, I think a slightly longer cover letter with a little bit more of the personal aspect would be good, because I think that the 2 very key elements of a cover letter are, the 3 very key elements are sort of completedness, formality, and then personalness. I think a lot of times people will hear the word formal and think it has to be very impersonal, very cold, and very distant. But I think it's always good to talk about, you know, your passions, your interests, and stuff like that while maintaining that degree of formality. So Thank you so much. So it's all very good contributions. I'm going to look at a few more and then we're going to go into questions. So this is an example. So up here they have the header information, the date, the contact information, the name of the person for the salutation. Then they go, I consider myself to be quite the juggler, not in the classic clown of the circus sense, but as it relates to thriving in an environment where I'm juggling task after task. Since October, I've worked as a coordinator at a salon with more than 100 employees and thousands of customers a week. Customer service, attention to detail, and multitasking are an absolute necessity. I'm sure you can imagine the demands of salon clientele. Now I'm anxious to parlay this experience into my true passion, sales. I love a challenge. I'm excited to learn and grow, and I want to do whatever it takes to be successful and contribute. I can't imagine a better place to do it than at CATS. I truly hope to have the opportunity to talk about the sales assistant job in more detail. I'll plan to follow up in a week's time. In the meantime, please feel free to contact me with any information, any questions you may have. Regards, Justin Jackson. So what do you guys think about this? How are we feeling?
I think this is a strong letter because it kind of conveys the confidence that you would need as a salesperson, and kind of that like spunky, like, I don't know, you get a sense for his personality and like it would be someone you would want to work with.
It's good. Anyone else? Okay, I think this is a very interesting cover letter because I think I'll talk about this a little bit more as well later, but I think a lot of times when we think of cover letter, like I said, we think of this like very formal, detached sense of writing. I think this is a very good example of showing the kind of passion that you have and showing the kind of interests that you have, as well as how a position fits into your grander career plans or your goals for life. I do think that there is two sides of this. You could make two arguments about this. One, that it's not very good because it's very, informal. It doesn't really, was informal in a sense. It doesn't really adhere to the traditional sense of a cover letter, and it's very, very sparse in some ways. I think a lot of times when people see exclamation marks in cover letters or in any kind of formal writing, they sort of have these like severe anxieties, being like, but you can't do that. I think that's a very true argument in some ways, but I also think this is a very good example of a less traditional cover letter, because I think there is one way in which a lot of times people forget that, like I said, you have to personalize cover letters to these companies. Each company has different cover letter, and sometimes I think you can pick up on the kind of I hate the word, but the vibe of the company. So I think the cover letter you'd submit for a place like CNN would be very different from the kind of cover letter you'd submit for a place like Gorka or The Onion. And I think that this is a very good example of like picking up on company culture and sort of weaving that into your writing as well. But I think that there's a very delicate balance that is hard to read sometimes, and it takes a little bit more of refining to get to. So I think this would be a very good first draft for writing that more personality letter, but I think it's going to take a little bit more work, a little bit more explanation as well. But yeah, thank you so much. We'll move on to the next example. So this is a very typical cover letter template. This is laying out piece by piece what you do. And I wanted to include this because I just wanted to get you guys' opinions on how you feel about this. I think this is a good enough cover letter example. No offense to these people up here. I think this really lays out a good template, but I think something I've struggled to articulate really well is having this fill in the blank attitude to writing cover letters can be very problematic because it seems very formulaic. And I know that you're going to be like, but you just told us to do templates. Yes, I did say do templates. But I think that when you're doing the personalization, it requires a lot more focus, which is hard because, you know, a lot of times you have to apply to a large volume of positions just because of the nature of, you know, the job market. But I think it's also something that's really important to remember is that it takes a lot of care and effort into writing these things. And I think that's truly what sets someone apart from other candidates. Because a lot of times you can have, you know, people who are applying with the same qualifications. They might even be like in the same classes and clubs as you. And I think that truly sets you apart is the ways in which you're able to show who you are as a person. And I think interviews are a great way to explain that, and that sometimes personality is such a big deciding factor in a lot of employment choices. And I think the cover letters are a very good jumping off point for that as well. So I think that this is a good example of how you should sort of start off. But I think using standard templates can also be problematic because you rely on, like I said, these like very formulaic, very like cut and paste kind of writing, which I do find can be detrimental in some positions. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute because I do want to find that example that didn't work earlier. So please give me 1 second. Okay, let's find out if this one will work. Okay, there we go. Woo! So this is a cover letter that was sent, and you cannot see it, but there was one thing that said, it was like a little label that said worst cover letters ever. So it goes, hey, so the subject is your next sales associate. And it goes, hey, you're probably reading a lot of applications and you're probably not enjoying yourself. I'm writing this cover letter and I'm not enjoying myself either. So let me cut to the chase. I won't pretend that your company's mission is my passion, but I do think sales are interesting. And you seem to have a strong background per your LinkedIn page. If you hire me, I'll show up for the hours you expect me to and do what's asked, and you'll like me. Let's face it, that puts me ahead of 99% of the candidates already. I graduated from Dash and was well liked there. And you know the importance of that for sales. I'm willing to bet that you won't like the personality of most of the people who appear to be qualified for this entry-level position, based on the fact that if they've had time to meet the qualifications for this job by the time they've graduated college, they likely have no social skills. As someone who's voted life of the party, both in high school and my fraternity, you won't have to worry about hiring some stiff loser who will poorly represent the youthful image of your company or any other worries you might have about your new hire being a cultural fit. You'll notice that I haven't talked about what skills I have yet. Do I honestly need to? I went to an elite institution and we all know I'd figure how to use whatever programs you'd like me to toil away with. Working your company doesn't take a rocket scientist, and I think we both know that. But the type of person you hire will matter, especially for your size team. Get back to me if you're looking for someone who you'll actually enjoy working with. So thoughts on this very brazen cover letter.
It's funny.
It is funny. When I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, especially when you read that it was sent out at like 11:30 on a Monday night. So he really is tired. And I think this is something that I've definitely felt sometimes when writing cover letters where I'm like, why am I doing this? This is so much effort and I might not even hear back. And why am I doing this? And I think this is another good example of like personality does matter. But if you're writing a cover letter and you spend the whole time being like, you want me because I'm so good at this job and you will literally be so lucky if you have me because I'm God's gift to green earth. It's not really a good, I'll say, angle. So I think that this is like a good example of what could have gone right because he does have the personality, he does have the, you know, the sense of humor that a lot of positions might require. But I think that there is again that lack of formality, that lack of sort of effort that a lot of employers are looking for. So I'm not going to say use this as a template and write like this, but I'm going to say this does show one of the most important parts of why writing individual cover letters is such a big deal, is because you're able to show these passions and skills and a bit of yourself in these letters, which is why I think this sort of fill in the blank template is, while it's very successful in getting across the message, I think that it can come across as very cold. So yeah, I hope that was helpful in any capacity. I know I really just talked a lot, but I think it's good to see these like examples of cover letters, which some of them are like brazenly bad. And then some of them are a little bit more like what went wrong, because there's like correct elements. And I think that there's no such thing as like a bad cover letter or a perfect cover letter. I think that's only what works for you. And I think that's why the personalization aspect is so important. Okay, so I know I have one question in the chat, and Isabel will get to that in a minute, but if anyone has any other questions about the content that I've spoken about, I'd be happy to answer. Even if you just want me to go back to a screen, or if you just want me to explain a little bit, feel free to ask anything. Okay, and then while we do that, I'm gonna pull up Isabel's link. So for those of you who didn't see the message, oh, sorry.
Oh, I have a question. So like basically for cover letters as a whole, is it okay to like just list your skills and then say why you have those skills? Because I didn't know if that was okay or not. I know for one that I have currently, I just kind of list the experiences that I've had recently that may like fit the job description in a sense, and try to use keywords like that. I don't know if that's a good idea, or just saying the skills that I have and then like reasoning to back it up would be okay.
I think a combination of both is a good idea. Using those keywords is always a good thing, because I think it's such a like small change that demonstrates a lot more than you realize. But I think sort of talking about the skills that you have and then explaining how they relate to the role is also a really good way of looking at it. I think at the end of the day, like it's more of a cover essay than a cover letter, because there's a lot of like you put forward evidence and then you back it up, but I think you also relate it to the company that you're applying to and what they're looking for. So I think it's that, yeah, I think it's like good to just go with like, these are the skills that I have and this is how it relates to what you're looking for. But I think that also having that sort of like trying to build that connection is also good. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so like do list off what I have as like my skill set, but then also like relate it back to the job description in a sense.
That's always good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because it shows that like one, you've read the job description, which you would be surprised at how many people don't do. But also that you've sort of put in the effort to think about that this position is right for you, not just based on your passion, but also on your skill set. So I think it's always just it's one of those things that's like it's a little thing that goes a long way, you know? So I think that's a really, really good strategy. So. Okay, so those who didn't read Isabel's question, she says, I have a link to a job posting I want to apply for. I was wondering if you could use it as an example of picking out keywords. And then this is the link. So I'm going to share the screen and we're going to talk through it. Let's make it a little bit of a fun activity, because that could be interesting. So the laboratory is looking for a talented research assistant who is interested in research to improve health and support for the well-being of all ages. The lab's blah, 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 blah at blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying blah, blah, blah because you know what I'm trying to say. Focuses on how a variety of psychosocial factors affect brain health. We study athletes because they often experience great physical stress and high rates of injury. So it talks about the purpose of the organization, and then it specifically lays out their goal. So I would say like something I find helpful is if there's a position that I'm really, really interested in, I'll sort of take a screenshot of the listing or copy paste it and then go through and highlight it. So this will be something I'd highlight. So the goal that they're talking about, And then when I'm talking about my experiences, picking on if there's specific things in my experience that relate to this goal or relate to the specific purpose of the goal is always good. And then this is the responsibilities are listed over here. So they'll be responsible for all of this. They will have experience or will be trained to conduct field research using multiple data collection methods. So this would be a good place to highlight as well, sort of talking about, I've conducted research in several areas using surveys, interviews, stuff like that, those mentions. My apologies, I'm not a science person, so I'm not very good at data collection methods. But if you have, again, experience in these specific areas, so data collection through questionnaires or through neurocognitive tests, sort of mentioning that directly will be good. There are also specific words I'll often use that you should look into that I haven't seen that much yet, but will come down over here. So the responsibilities include meets with other people to discuss these findings. This is also a really good way to find the kind of words they're looking for, not just for your cover letter, but also for your resume, because it uses these very good action verbs and keywords that employers look for. So I always recommend keeping an eye out for these. But also then this helps to look at your, sorry, the wind is really blowing. Looking at your personal experiences and seeing if there's anything that directly aligns with these, because sometimes obviously, oh, I work for a different lab and we did in vivo analysis. So obviously you'd mentioned that directly. But then some other places it might be a little bit more of that nuanced connections. So, administered questionnaires. You could talk about, well, I worked with focus groups and I worked with participants and working with people. Even if you maybe work in sales or something, this might be a good place to draw that transferable skill connection. To sort of be I have experience working with people and I have experience collecting data, stuff like that. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
You can also go into stuff like this, analyzing data, writing. This would be a good place again to connect it to other experience you've had, whether that be doing research or other kind of writing experience you have, whether that be at school or even in your professional experiences. So
one question I had was, I have I would say 3 to 4 experiences that I are varying levels of relevance to this job, but I feel like there's 2 that are really relevant. One is as a current research assistant, but then the other one was an internship that was focused on a high school football team and their mental health. So I feel I don't know, I'm just figuring out which one I should put first.
I think in that situation, I would rely a lot more on the skills. If there's, something that connects the 2 of them, mentioning that as the first skill. And also I think in a cover letter, it doesn't really matter which one comes first, as long as you're explaining both of them pretty well. So, they explain 2 different sides of your interests in this, right? So your position with the high school mental health stuff relates to the care of men of all ages. It relates to that goal greatly. But perhaps a lot of your experience with the research assistant fits with the responsibilities they need. So I'd say include both of them, but just make sure that you are able to explain the kind of work you did with them, and then relying on those, perhaps these keywords they use over here or here to discuss them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course. And then we'll get to this last section, which I think is a pretty big area as well. This talks about a lot more of the kind of things they're looking for interpersonally. So, obviously, if you have experience with doing large scale communication, please mention it here. But even if you don't, if you're oh, well, I have a lot of research experience, but I don't really have a lot of hands-on experience, but I work at anthropology. This is a good way to talk about how you're able to work with people. You've worked in positions that have required you to interact with customers or manage data from individual people. And this is a good example of taking those skills that you might have learned somewhere else, which I think a lot of times people are like, well, is it really relevant? Because it's not, a direct position as a research assistant, but I think it's still a good way of showcasing the skills that you've developed through a variety of experiences. And you do have a lot of those. It's just the being able to spin it in a way where you're able to talk about those skills.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things you could do is highlighting those specific key terms, looking at your resume, seeing the skills that you've learned, and sort of maybe even distilling this down to the key things they're looking for. So what I've gathered from this is they're looking for someone who's able to work with people, someone who is responsible and can manage large amounts of data, someone who has experience in data collection and data analysis, and someone who has experience with working in a team and has strong writing skills, which I think, I think it's sometimes a difficult thing. It can be very intimidating reading job listings because you're like, they're asking me for so much and I don't know. Like, for example, they use a lot of like specific words like salivary cortisol collection, which can be kind of unnerving, especially as someone who is a college student applying for internships and entry-level positions. But I think it's a good way to sort of distill it down to the key elements they're looking for. So they're looking for someone who's responsible, a team player, someone who's able to understand data, and someone who's able to write about that data. So I hope that was helpful. But if we don't have any other questions, I'm just going to do my last little bits of things to remember. So like I said, there's no one specific way to write cover letters. I think there's a misconception from a lot of people that I have to write in the specific way. It has to be in the specific template. And I think that looking at it as more of a format than a template is always good. And there's always just one way that works for you, whatever feels right for you, whatever you think is the best reflection of your skills, your abilities, and you as a person is the best way to write the cover letter, I would say. On that note, I want to talk a little bit about creative jobs because I think that those are often things that stress people out when we talk about these like formal job application prospects. With resumes particularly, as a lot of you will know, it really depends on the kind of position you're applying for. So obviously if you're applying for a position at Morgan Stanley, having a creative resume might not be the best course of action. But if you're applying to work at Adobe, that's the best thing you could present them with, something that's a beautiful graphic design work of art that is able to creatively and completely explain the things you're doing. And I think cover letters are sort of the same. So, just making sure that whatever format you end up going with, you're still remaining professional, you're still maintaining that, a formal tone of writing, and also just like being aware of the job and the organization. Sometimes you'll specifically mention, right, like in lieu of a cover letter, submit X, Y, and Z. But even in general, like, if it's, like I said, if you're applying to a company like The Onion, they're not really going to want something like a CNN cover letter because that's not the kind of writing they do. That's not the kind of work they do. So I think having that sort of ability, or sort of honing that ability to look at these listings and these companies and knowing what would be right and knowing what works for you is always good. Although I know that can be a little intimidating. So as long as you are writing in a way that is true to yourself and one that really demonstrates and articulates things that you're good at and the things that they're looking for, you should be fine. But I just wanted to emphasize that as well. And lastly, remember that you always have resources available to you. Not only your friends and your family, but also as AU students, you have the Career Center. So if you're a co-guard major, you have the Office of Career Engagement. If you're an SIS junior or senior, you have the Office of Career Development. And then if you're, in any other school, or if you're a SIS freshman or sophomore, you always have the Career Center. You can make appointments with your career advisors. You can come to events that we have like this. You can also meet with peer advisors like myself. And I'll talk about our contact info on the next slide. But yeah, I think it's a very intimidating thing, but always like being cognizant that it's just one cover letter. It's not the be all and end all. And that you have a lot more skills than you give yourself credit for is something that I think a lot of people always forget. But you all would do great. I'm very excited to see all the amazing things you do. So lastly, this is my little thank you slide. Thank you so much for coming and listening. I know I basically spoke at you for 50 minutes, but I really do appreciate it. Like I said, I'm a peer advisor. I work with 4 other peer advisors. You can contact us via email through aupeeradvisors@gmail.com or on Instagram at AUCCPAs. In addition to that, we have drop-in hours. So we have in-person and virtual hours on Mondays and Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., on Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then outside of that, we only have virtual hours, Tuesday and Wednesday, 4 to 8, and Friday, 9 to 5. And there's a lot of information to remember, and you can find this information on Handshake as well under the resource library if you search up Career Center Peer Advisors. And you can come in, meet with us. We can go through your resume, your cover letter, your LinkedIn, any other general career questions you might have. In addition to that, we also, like I said, have career advisors, which you can make appointments with them through Handshake, or you can come to drop-in hours, which are 2 to 4 Tuesday and Wednesday, both online and in person. So yes, thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording. But yes, thank you so much.